did they change the writers in the second half? Like, I don't understand how can something written with such perfection suddenly end up becoming so unbalanced the moment it crosses the half season threshold? Because what is even happening in the second half? Hello and welcome to Talk About Drama, where we talk about what's hot and what's not in the drama world. And today we're going to talk about Bridgerton. Well, the latest season of Bridgerton, so Sophie and Benedict season. And honestly, I was thinking that I loved the first half. Like, it was the perfect Bridgerton. It gave me the first season vibes because of how good the writing was. And I was so submissive by it. And I waited until the second part was nearby before I watched the first half, because I don't like waiting, especially when it's merely 8 episodes. Like, are you kidding me? 8 episodes are spaced a month apart. So I thought that since it's dropping late February, I'll just catch up a couple of days before the second half drops. And I loved it. I was only going to watch an episode a day, and I ended up binging it and rewatching it in the time span it took for the second half to drop. And I was so disappointed when I saw the second half. Like, I fast forwarded through certain parts because of how, I wouldn't say bad, but what am I even watching over here? Like, the first half set up the story so well. And I loved the fact that Sophie didn't show up for the first 15 or something minutes of the episode. Because you're seeing the Bridgerton family, you're seeing the people around the Bridgerton family, you're seeing the fallout from the previous season. And then when they're getting ready for the ball, suddenly this new face shows up, and that's Sophie, right? We've all seen stills, but it was so perfect. And the first episode itself, it didn't focus on Sophie, it focused on Benedict trying to find Sophie. Who is she, this lady in the silver? Who is she? And second episode onwards, we finally get a look into Sophie's world. And I really refrained from reading the novel because after Daphne's season, I decided to read the novel, and I ended up reading Daphne's and Anthony's, which was bad because it just made Anthony's season insufferable, would be a very strong word, but not an ideal experience for me. And I decided not to do it with Colin's and Benedict's books, basically. So I haven't read the books. I'm purely going on what I've seen in the drama, and I have some words, but I do not understand what kind of hurry they have in furthering Francesca's plot and killing the Earl of Kilmartin this very season. Like, it was supposed to be Benedict's season, and I understand that you want to show the lives of the other Bridgerton children as well, but why do it on Benedict's behalf when you've barely shown us Benedict or Sophie, for that matter? Like, in the first 4 episodes, the only thing we saw was Sophie's childhood, which was barely a glimpse, and then we saw her at the funeral, her father's funeral, which was again barely a glimpse, and then we saw how she was struggling in the Penwood household and how she was kicked out. But it would have been so much better if you'd gotten a glimpse into Sophie's life. It could have been like Lady Penwood frequently got into heated conversations with Lord Penwood, and he would be like, you have children yourself, how could you not love this child? And then Lady Penwood would be like, you hid that you had a child from me. And maybe Rosamund overheard these discussions, and this is the reason why she hates Sophie. And Posy, obviously, she's kind to Sophie because she's never actually overheard these things, and Rosamund and Posy actually have a conversation regarding this. And maybe just show us Posy and Sophie as kids. Like, there's so much to unpack in Sophie's life story. Even Benedict, like, all of this time, he's basically considered himself as a spare in the Bridgerton household. And at the moment as well with Anthony, he's basically being treated as his replacement. There would have been so much to unpack because like, snippets of conversation don't mean anything when the damage has already been done. Violet Bridgerton standing in front of Benedict Bridgerton and reminding him how him marrying a maid would spell trouble for his siblings' future marriages doesn't really sound severe when she herself is already courting another man and thinking of a second marriage just a few days ago. Like, Lady Bridgerton remarrying Lady Danbury's brother, despite having 7, 8 kids of her own and at such an advanced age. It could have very well backfired on her and basically lower her standings in front of the entire ton. Like, it was there for the taking, but then nobody actually talked about it. Like, Benedict was sulky at best, and Violet was basically flip-flopping around the entire season. In one moment she's like with Lady Danbury's brother, and the other moment she's like she's not. And I'm not saying Violet is wrong, she's not. She's very, very in the right to consider the well-being of her kids before her own relationship, because that is the way she has been for so many years. She's put her kids first. She's put effort into making sure her kids' life is not lacking into anything. But the thing is, the writers are writing it in, I would say, such a convoluted way that it just comes out as Violet Bridgerton flip-flopping rather than her actually having a conversation regarding her kids' future and deciding to choose her kids, her house, over a new relationship. Because they just speed running into everything. And why are the Featheringtons on my screen so much? What purpose do they serve? I do not know. Even after the Maid Wars have ended, like, why am I seeing Portia Featherington and her maid drama when this was supposed to be about the Bridgerton kids, specifically Benedict Bridgerton? And I do not know if somebody in the writers' room has special love for the Featheringtons, because even Penelope being Mrs. Bridgerton, her husband Colin Bridgerton is basically an arm candy this season. Like, that guy barely has 2 lines, and the only thing he does is stay in the background and smile. And then there's Anthony. Why even bring back Anthony and then not have him show up at the funeral? What was the whole point of it? And I know I'm reacting so negatively to the second half, and I honestly would have waxed lyrical for the first half, and had the writing remained the same, I would have loved this season just as I loved season 1, because even though it wasn't the perfect thing, at least it gave us an insight into everybody. The main characters were the main characters, and other people's story did not interfere with the main character's story, because yes, you're trying to make a coherent show with so many cast characters, and they are in the process of phasing out certain characters. Like, with the way things have been going, I'm very sure Kate and Anthony are not going to show up in the succeeding seasons. Lady Danbury has already been phased out. I don't know if they're going to make the Queen a mere placeholder or have her appear, because Lady Mondrick is now in the play with the Queen, so probably they're still going to have the Queen because she is the Queen after all. But then even after that, like, it's like they're bitten up way more than they can chew. Because why am I seeing Francesca and her grief of losing her husband when we've barely seen her get happy with that guy? Like, John and Francesca deserved to be happy this season. And if the indicators are right, the next season is probably going to be Francesca's, and it's going to be Francesca and Michaela, as I've been told, because she's supposed to be with Michael, which they've changed to Michaela. So it's going to be both of them if the next season is indeed Francesca's. And they should have ended the season with Francesca and her husband be together, with her husband being alive and well, but him developing the cough. And then the next season, the first 15 or 20 minutes like they did with this season would have been, they're happy, they're hosting a ball, but then the headaches are getting more frequent. And then one night, John goes to sleep, and 15 minutes into the first episode, he's gone. And the first episode is basically his funeral, because the focus would have been on Francesca instead of being on Benedict and Sophie, and then flip-flopping between Francesca and her Michaela drama. Like, I do not understand, because I genuinely did not get time to get connected to this guy, because 1, he was barely there. 2, why kill him off so early? Like, what was the point? They should have focused more on Benedict and Sophie. They should have given us more of Benedict and Sophie, because the wedding was basically an afterthought. It was after the credits started playing and I thought the episode was over. I was about to click out, and then suddenly the screen came back on again, and it was the wedding. It was so bad, because what do you mean I'm watching the wedding? And it's a post-credit scene. It was so funny. Like, I genuinely, it's like it's a Turkish expression, like "sinir bozuldu." Like, it broke my nerves, seriously, because why? Because you could have had Sophie get caught as a thief in episode 6. Episode 7 would have been Benedict and Violet and basically the entire Bridgerton house scheme to get her out of prison. Because I remember somebody sharing on Twitter, like, this was the last 2 hours or 3 hours, because I really needed some place to vent. And somebody shared an excerpt from the novel, and I think somebody from the Bridgerton household, probably the kids, saw Sophie being taken by the Bow Street runners. I do not know. And they basically went in and grabbed their mum, like, Sophie's been taken away, and Benedict basically flew out the door, pulling his mother, and basically shoved her into a carriage and went away. And I think it was Francesca who was supposed to be cursing at the door. It was Eloise, I do not know. But that sounded way too much funnier and more impactful, because you now know that you have basically 2 more episodes to go, with 1 episode being used to untangle the web of Araminta's lies, and 1 episode of Sophie and Benedict being happy in their own little world. And that last episode would have been Benedict coming to terms with the fact that he's no longer a spare. He's a part of this household. He does get to feel belonged, and he does get to have Sophie by his side. Sophie reinforcing her love and finding out that she is indeed being loved in this world with everybody, her friends, her colleagues, her newly found family. They all love her. Araminta basically being kicked to the countryside. Josie being there for Sophie throughout her marriage preparations. Francesca being increasingly worried of her husband's health. And Anthony, along with Kate, being there for their siblings. Because what do you mean? They used Viscount Bridgerton's name and Duke of Hastings' name in court, and they never actually brought them up. What was the point? I thought they probably forgot Duke of Hastings, but they did not. They just don't show up anymore. I get you can't bring the Duke of Hastings, but you can bring the Duchess of Hastings. Like, Daphne's there for the taking. And then you have Anthony, who threatens his younger brother with disownment and then vanishes for 3 episodes and finally appears at the wedding. He was there the entire time. He was in Mayfair. He could have shown up to the funeral. Like, his wife does not live in India anymore. He's not taking a chartered flight. He's basically taking a chartered carriage. What was the point? You know, if they really didn't want Anthony and Kate involved in the Bridgerton house's affairs, it could have simply been like, Anthony came, issued his ultimatum to Benedict, and then because he was feeling uneasy about having his wife and child travel alone, he went back to wherever they were staying in London, in the countryside, to fetch his wife and kid and bring them to the Bridgerton house. That is why he's absent from all the developments in the Bridgerton household. And that is why Benedict is basically running around in circles, trying to solve everyone's problems when Anthony supposedly 2 doors down. And at the end, Kate, baby Edmund, and Anthony would have been back. Although I'm not sure how back they are, because they are probably going to get the axe next season from the looks of it. I do not know what they have against Kate, and why is she always sidelined in every single thing. Actually, the second half reminded me so much of Kate and Anthony season, which is why it further infuriated me, because wow, that second season sideline was hard to watch, especially if you've already read the novel. Like, I'm not saying Noel Anthony was a saint, okay? He wasn't. And I actually liked the Bridgerton series version Anthony, but the thing is, the book had so much to do with Kate and Kate's backstory, which was completely erased from the show. And they did the same with Sophie, because even though Sophie did have her background story told through a couple of scenes in the first half, the second half was basically not Sophie. It was just her going around pining and being worried and having dalliances with Benedict and then basically vanishing the next day. Because do you really want me to believe that Benedict Bridgerton, who's finally found the love of his life, he spent the night with her, and then the next morning she's up and she's all like, this was a mistake. She goes away and he leaves her for like the 7 or 8 days to come, really? Because I bet that boy would take a ladder, sneak in through the window if he wants, just to meet Sophie. And it would have been scandal in the Bridgerton house, because, you know, Benedict Bridgerton is sneaking into the house via windows. And it would have been so fun to watch. It would have given the show a much needed dash of humour, which was missing, because it was also dark and dreary. I do not know why all of the humour, all of the fun was sucked down in the second half, because I loved seeing the Bridgertons sneak Sophie into the ball. I loved seeing them get together and try to solve the problem. I loved seeing Benedict break the news about him and Sophie to everybody in the family, and it was so much fun. And I really wish we could have seen more of the Bridgertons rather than everybody else, even the Queen, because like I said, they've bitten off way more than they can chew, and they're trying to build up this whole empire of different characters, but you only have 8 episodes to work with. It is not enough time. You win some, you lose some, and because of this, details keep getting overlooked. Short, small things. And, you know, honestly and quite frankly, it felt quite disrespectful to Benedict, who has been searching for the Lady in Silver for so many episodes, to have found her at the end of episode 7 when the entire show itself is ending at episode 8. At least give us some time to process this. Give Benedict some time to process this. Give them some time to talk it out, because the confession is immediately followed by Sophie being taken in as a thief, and then it's all how to exonerate Sophie and finally how to legitimize her. And it's all done in one episode, and I do not have any idea why they felt like they needed to rush that. Not to mention, I was looking up the background music, and because I loved the piece that they played when Sophie was leaving the Bridgerton house and she got apprehended as a thief, and I found out that, well, I didn't find that piece of music, but I found out that apparently the makers didn't put any music like the ones repurposed from like the original songs. They didn't put any orchestra versions of the music in episode 7 out of respect for John. And then immediately in episode 8, they followed it up by Benedict's wedding and invited his very, very newly grieving wife over to the wedding. So Francesca is barely 2 weeks out in mourning, attending her elder brother's wedding, and it was a joke. Honestly, it was a joke. Like, they could have had a time skip in between. What was the point of having the wedding so early on when your sister literally just fell apart and you saw her fall apart? Like, Benedict was there for the entire thing. And then they had the wedding, and technically the Bridgerton family should be mourning as well. And I found it quite odd that nobody from the Kilmartin family stayed behind for Francesca. They just literally abandoned her, especially Michaela. And all of this was literally after Michaela intruded into Francesca and John's lives, saw the grief that Francesca went through. Francesca actually accepted her and point blank asked her not to leave because, she's grieving. She just lost her husband. And the closest thing that she has to her husband as a connection is Michaela. And she overheard Francesca talking about how she feels inadequate because she didn't have a child with John. And after everything, she's still left without a word. It was like a slap in the face, and I do not know how they're going to redeem her. But the point is, Michaela left, yes, but did nobody from the Kilmartin family stay behind? Was there nobody frowning upon Francesca attending her brother's wedding, even though technically it was in the countryside? I think they went to Benedict's, my cottage, well, our cottage, and held the wedding in the backyard. But still, your sister's in mourning, barely 2 weeks out, and you're holding a wedding after seeing her fall apart. It was haphazard is a good word for it, and I don't understand why they went with it. Like I said, it was the whole reason of killing John in the first place when it could have easily been handled in Francesca's season. And then you have the entire show to explore the effects it had on Francesca and how it shaped her relationship with Michaela. But yes, coming back to our main point, I really didn't like the way they had the whole Benedict finding out about Sophie being the lady in silver thing, because as Benedict finally sees the necklace lying in his room, which by the way must not have been cleaned properly, because technically that necklace should have been on his dresser. Had somebody come in and clean the room and found a stray necklace, they would have just placed it on the dresser. Besides the point, he saw the necklace and his mind started racing through where he's seen it before, and then finally he started digging through his drawings. And I think they intercut the scene with Sophie and Benedict's time in the gazebo to sort of show them that that is what he's remembering when he sees the necklace. But it came off a little haphazard, because I would have liked seeing Benedict digging through the drawings, and he finally found it. His hands are shaking as they were, and he lifts up the drawing and compares it to the necklace, and it's a one-shot scene. There's no intercutting with other scenes. And then as we zoom out from Benedict's face, we go behind him, and as we move behind him we get a black screen, and suddenly in front of us we're seeing the gazebo where Sophie and Benedict are dancing during that night. And then we move around and we see it's actually Sophie that we're seeing. Sophie standing in front of the gazebo and she's remembering that night, and to her it's like the final sweetest memory that she has of this place, and that is what she wants to keep in her mind before she leaves this place. And as Sophie moves, Benedict and Sophie are still dancing behind her in the gazebo, and as Sophie moves, the gazebo is shut off, and it's all dark and dreary. I mean, it is a very rough concept, but it would have been so much magical, because at the same time they're both looking at the same scene, they're both trying to find the same thing, the person that they were that night, and they found it, but at what cost? And then as Sophie's moving, there's the intercutting scene of Benedict moving through the house. He finally goes into Sophie's room, and as Sophie's moving towards the gate, there's an intercutting scene of Benedict going to Sophie's room, and he finally finds the glove, and it's intercut by the scene of Benedict having the glove in his hand, when Sophie's left him, and he's just standing there like a buffoon. And again it switches back to Benedict in Sophie's room, and as he looks out the window, it's the same window that Sophie's looking at, and she just walks out the door and she's apprehended by the constable. It was a very rough thing, but the background music was divine. It was so amazing. I still can't find it, by the way. Shazam's not been much of a help, but I will find it. And listening to it 3-4 times in a loop, because I was trying to find the song, kind of gave me a vision of what the scene could have looked like, because we barely have any time left, and at least we could play around with what we have. And had this been the ending of episode 6, then episode 7 would have been, like I said, Sophie being exonerated, and episode 8 would have been like a happy family thing. Then just like I liked the Bridgerton series version of Anthony, I loved Benedict. Again, I do not have the novel to compare him with, but I loved that boy. He was so, I would say, dreamy, because he lived in his own world, especially in the beginning. And when he was with Sophie in the countryside, he was basically every woman's dream. And he was happy, he was sulky, he was sad, you know, even as an injured boy, it was amazing. It was the way he never put Sophie down for anything. He was indulging her in every single thing. She is his guest for all intents and purposes, and to him it does not matter what Sophie's station was, but she is his guest when he intends to give her the full guest treatment. And I think that was so beautiful because, you know, he's noticed her. You know, he's the only one who recognized Hyacinth at the ball. And it's not a coincidence because she was dressed as a maid. And when the maid was being assaulted at the Cavendish house, Benedict was the only one who noticed and stood up for her. So I loved these little details, and like I said, I loved the dreamy Benedict he was at my cottage because he was easygoing, he was boyish, and he finally let loose. And, you know, he's still that Benedict when they come back to London, but, you know, he's much more restrained. Because, you know, he has the responsibilities of the Bridgerton house being put upon his broad, dainty shoulders, and he has to suppress himself to basically become the head of the Bridgerton household in his brother's absence. And that sort of leads him to turn down his charm. But, you know, I would have liked to see Benedict wasting one of his old haunts, you know, meeting up with people that he was meeting up with during the first couple of episodes, and basically realizing that, you know, he wants no other company except for Sophie, you know, in the time when, you know, they were technically broken up, and not visit there to philander or anything, but just visit there to clear his head because, you know, he is friends with a lot of those people and he wanted their advice because, you know, Anthony wasn't available. And would have been nice because, you know, those people basically vanished and Anthony came for like 2 seconds and then he vanished too. And after that, Benedict was basically directionless person, just like roaming around, having everyone tell him what to do. And then finally he burst out. And one thing I really didn't understand was why was Benedict yelling about his family's business in the stairwell and at the gentleman's club. Like, okay, I understand you're frustrated, but why yell and let everybody know what's going on? Like I was so sure someone was going to overhear him, but it just didn't happen. So I was a little confused, but yeah, okay. Can we please work on the costumes next season and maybe even the hairstyles? Because like I said, I don't think they're going to keep Kate on for much longer, but if she does appear in the next season for like a scene, can you not put her in curtains? Can you give her a good dress like she had in her own season? Like season 2, Kate's dresses were beautiful, they were divine. And ever since she's become the Viscountess, the only thing that she seems to be wearing are curtains. Even though I've seen inspo boats with beautiful Indian dresses online and they would look amazing on Kate, and I do not know why they're not using it. And same goes for Sophie as well. I remember in the first half when we were seeing Sophie, her hair was always up in a bun because she's in a maid mode, right? Even when she's out in the countryside, even when she's in the ball, her hair's up. But the last time we saw her hair down was at her father's funeral, like a lady. Because now, once her freedom has been taken away, once she's become the maid, Sophie Baek, her hair have gone up in a bun. And the moment she and Benedict basically have the first night together, her hair come down. The first thing that she does is she takes out that cap and she undoes her bun because now she's free of the constraints. She's free of that tightly tied bun on her head, that burden of being the maid of Bridgerton household. And she's just Sophie. It was such a beautiful thing to see. And then her worrying about her periods because she does not want to end up like herself in this world because she knows the consequences of her actions, like the very real consequences. And they did not discuss it more than a few lines. Like it was so devastating to me personally because Benedict Bridgerton saw his mum, his pregnant mum, being devastated after his father's death. And I'm telling you, given the state of the ton now and then, there could have been questions about Hyacinth's legitimacy in the Bridgerton family. Because, you know, her father's dead, the mum's pregnant, but she's basically got no husband. And people could have questioned whether Hyacinth is really a Bridgerton child or not. And it was a very possible thing. And this would have been a very beautiful, beautiful moment for Benedict to understand that, you know, Sophie and him have a very real risk of having their kids basically not being recognized anywhere, being hidden away in the countryside like people who shall not be seen, and how it could have affected their kids because Sophie has first-handedly felt those consequences, and it could have led to Benedict just going out into the society once again like his crowd. And there he could have questioned, you know, can I really give up all of this for just one person? Can I really build a family with her in the countryside? Because resentment against your spouse is a very real thing. And who's to say Benedict wouldn't resent Sophie after a while? But he would still choose to stay by her side because that is what he promised. He is a man of promises. But then they would have both lived together in resentment because Benedict would resent Sophie, and after a while Sophie would come to resent her life, you know? Why is this happening to me all over again? And that was a very real thing. And they could have built up more on that instead of going back and forth in the Featherington household and with the Queen. And what was that half-baked plan of having Sophie's charge waived off by the recommendation of the Queen? Like, I do not understand. Why go to the Queen before you have all of your ducks lined up? Like, why are they rushing to the highest authority possible without doing the groundwork themselves? It did not make sense, because Sophie was out there looking for the will, and Benedict knew that. But then why rush to the Queen and try and get her over to their side? Like, it could have simply been like Lady Danbury trying to feel out the Queen and see how she reacts to a piece of gossip, rather than explicitly telling her it was about Benedict Bridgerton. And then later on, when Sophie gets to know about the will and, they have sorted it out with Araminta, that is when, they finally decide to bring the Queen in. And by that time, Mrs. Mondrick, who's obviously overheard Sophie and Benedict during the ball and sought Lady Danbury out in the hallways of the castle once she was exiting after feeling out the Queen. And she's basically got a picture of what was happening. Then she's gone home to her husband, had a conversation with him, and then basically decided, I want to help these two people. And then finally, that is when they go to the Queen. Because it is such a mess at the moment. Because why would you involve the Queen so early on when Araminta is not going to run to the Queen in the first instance because she does not have any proof, and it can backfire on her because Lady Danbury supports Violet Bridgerton, and if not for anything, she would go easy on Violet just because of her friendship to Lady Danbury and all of the years that she's seen this woman. Plus, that would also mean Araminta putting herself in danger of being exposed. And once Sophie found out, her father actually did leave her money, it could have led to a conversation between her and Benedict about how, yes, her father did love her, but this isn't really love for your child, because after being loved by someone, you shouldn't have to feel insecure about whether or not they love you. Had her father loved her truly and genuinely, she wouldn't have to rely on her stepmother's word after his death. She wouldn't have to accept the fact that, her father sidelined her the first instance after he passed away. Like, this isn't necessarily the feeling of love, but more like the desperation of a child trying to find some balance, trying to find some familiar affections in her life. And this, what they're feeling now for each other, is love, where they don't have to guess the other person's affections. They don't have to ask for it. They understand each other's affections by their words, by their actions. They don't have to second guess each other. Like Benedict's entire life, he's had to second guess whether he's good enough for his family. And Sophie had to second guess whether she's worthy of being loved by her family. Like, both of them were desperate for some kind of affection, some kind of recognition in their own ways. And it could have been a beautiful moment, like for Benedict to be like, I'm not just Anthony's little brother, I am Benedict Bridgerton, the child of his household. Like, this could have been a good parallel to Violet and Benedict's conversation about how Benedict is more like Violet when she was a young lady, and how he is truly his mother's child. And it would have been nice, because I really wanted to see them talk to each other and maybe hug a little bit more, because they've barely had any hugs, and they deserve all the hugs, both Benedict and especially Sophie. Like, she deserves the biggest hug in the world. And then I just wanted to wrap her up, sit her down in front of a nice fireplace with a mug of hot chocolate in her hand, and just like tell her, there, it's okay, it's all over. You got through this, and you're going to get through this life, and you're going to be happy. But her own wedding was an afterthought in her own season, so I do not know how they're going to progress. And I feel like they're going to be like Kate and Anthony in the third season, when they had more scenes together than they did in their own season. But it was quite awkwardly placed in between other people, and wasn't quite the same, because now they're just there, I guess. There's no angst in between the both of them. And Sophie and Benedict could have served angst to the capital letter A. And it would have been so nice to watch them trying to cross the boundary in Bridgerton House, and everybody trying to keep them apart, but they keep finding ways to get into each other's rooms. And I'm just saying, we could have had so much more, but we didn't. And I am feeling more than a little upset about it. It reminded me so much of Thai dramas, or Chinese dramas, like, the ones I'm talking about, where the first 5-6 episodes, they start slow and steady, they build up characters, they meander about for like 5-6 episodes, then another 5-6 episodes, they basically do nothing, let the side characters take over, and then in the last 2 episodes, something starts to happen, the inciting incident, you could say, and it was supposed to happen halfway through, but it happens in the last 2-3 episodes, and the final episode, final 10 minutes, is basically the male lead and the female lead reuniting and driving off into the sunset, which is basically Bridgerton season 4. And it's certain Korean dramas as well. Like, I'm not excluding those because every drama has this problem, but I do not expect this of a drama that has taken 2-3 years to be written, to be shot, to be meticulously crafted, after so much money being poured, after so much attention being given to it, and you deliver such subpar quality of work. Like, even the CGI in certain places is not well done. Like, it's barely passable. And it's just a disappointment because you're waiting eagerly for these things, right? And they're being promoted left, right, and centre. And it's not something that you're making up in your own head because you can actually see these things happening in real time. Like, I do not understand what this style of writing is where you constantly marginalise your main characters in favour of side characters who are not even part of the story. And then you rush on the last episode to get the main characters their happy ending while still focusing on certain side characters. Like, I did not need to know about Wally and Portia Featherington's happily ever after in the last episode. That time could have been spent on Benedict and Sophie's wedding. Benedict proposing in the middle of the dance floor. Like, it could have been after Benedict and Sophie got home. Sophie is being led away because they're not supposed to be together, as they want to do it the right way. But then Eloise maybe helps Sophie sneak away while she's still dressed up because Benedict asked her a favour, and he takes her to the gazebo and Benedict asks for a dance. The clock strikes 12. There's gongs in the background. Sophie is like, oh, I should leave. And when she turns around, Benedict asks her, are you happy with the Penwood name? And Sophie turns around and confused. She's like, yes, I am happy with the Penwood name. And then slowly Benedict pulls out a ring and says, well, would you mind if I cut it short and make you a Bridgerton already? It would have been the perfect recall to the time when Benedict was trying to hold back Sophie, but she slipped away from his hands. But this time, when he called her out and asked her to be with him, she said yes, for the perfect scene, because I really do cherish the way Benedict and Sophie got together the first time. Like, Sophie just looking up at the chandelier and admiring its beauty, and then Benedict is focusing on her because to him, who feels alone even when surrounded by a crowd, there's this girl who's standing alone in a crowd and she does not feel the need to be surrounded by many people. She's much happy and content in herself. And then when she rejects the gentleman by sneakily hiding her dance card, Benedict swoops in, takes the opportunity and whisks her way over to the gazebo. It was the most perfect way they could get together, because you've seen the Bridgertons, we already know these people, but we do not know Sophie. And Sophie being shrouded in mystery the first episode. She's just a lady in silver. And we get to know more about her in the second episode. And it's heartbreaking. But it's also what gives you hope to root for this girl who's happy and content with just little things in life and has been robbed of basically everything. Even though she's entitled to far more than what Lady Penwood is giving her at the moment. Like, Araminta is the real villain of Sophie's life. But you also understand that, it is a society which pits women against women. They're basically not allowed to do anything apart from just being a decorative piece in the husband's household to produce heirs. And like Araminta having the conversation with Posy, she's going to turn on Posy and use her. But it's also something that we've just seen happen with Francesca, who is about to lose the Kilmartin house, the Kilmartin family title and everything related to that family, simply because she and husband do not have an heir, because her husband died an untimely death, and she can be kicked out of the Kilmartin house if the next person taking over the title doesn't want her there. And that was basically a position that Araminta was also put into because she has daughters, but then she herself has no sons. And the moment Lord Penwood kicked the bucket, she was out of business. Like, I'm not saying that gives her a pass at being cruel to Sophie, at exploiting her, and at being the worst person in the world to her. But what I'm saying is, on one hand, you're showing us the mirror to the society with Francesca suffering the consequences of the ton of the society's expectations. But on the other hand, you're basically making her a classic cartoonish villain instead of putting a little more depth into it, because she's a terrible person, but you could have written her a well-written villain. There's a difference, and the potential was ripe for the taking, but they just let it go. And then there's the certain inclusion and exclusion of the staff at Bridgerton household. Like, we finally had a look into what happens in the background, and we finally got a good comparison into how the Bridgerton family functions and how the people who take care of the Bridgerton family functions. Like, the best example was Gregory's appointment at the barber, and he came to the Bridgerton house and the boys started fighting with the shaving foam. And to them, it's like a boy scuffle, right? The next moment, there's a maid who's having to scrub it all out from all of the different places in the room, because it's hard to get shaving foam out of anything, especially in that time when cleaning supplies were very limited. And through the boys' eyes, we see all the fun and games, and through Sophie's eyes, we see all the mess that has to be taken care of by the person who picks up after them. Like, it was such a good detail. And all I'm saying is, you build up such a world where contrasts are there for the taking, and you do try and build upon them, but it just falls flat in the second half, which does not make sense. Like, even Benedict's confession to Sophie of being his mistress, it hurt Sophie, as it should. I would have punched him. And then there's Anthony that decides to threaten him with disownment just so he could not bring harm upon the family. And then there's his mum, who's completely against it. But I felt like in the second half, the whole thing was taken for granted, because it's all talk, but there's no real consequences for the Bridgerton's actions from the previous seasons. Like, Anthony ended up marrying his betrothed's elder sister. The Duke of Hastings and Anthony Bridgerton had a duel for the sake of his sister's honour. And now Benedict Bridgerton is going to marry a maid. And everyone is going to know that she's a maid, because even though she's supposedly the Penwood's cousin, she has gone out in the Bridgerton maid uniform for shopping. Maids talk, and everyone's going to know. And that is probably one of the reasons why they're going to have to retreat from the society and maybe go to their cottage, which I really missed in the final episodes, because it was the perfect sanctuary for Benedict and Sophie. What I'm saying is, consequences are only being talked about, but they're not being shown in real time. And it just reduces the impact of the whole thing, because you don't give your words weight by following it up by action. It's just words at the end of the day then. And I will forever be salty about this. But yeah, I hope in the next season we do have some update about Benedict and Sophie, and how they're living out their lives in their cottage with the Crabtrees. If there's any update on Hazel and John's relationship, and how just like things panned out for everyone in the Bridgerton family, like whoever's left really. Because with the way things are going, Colin is probably going to be the eldest brother around by the time we get to Gregory, because we already know Daphne's out. Probably Kate and Anthony too, or if Anthony's going to come again, he's going to be in a very limited capacity and then just vanish into thin air once again, even though he's the Viscount and the rightful owner of the house. And if Sophie and Benedict end up going to the countryside, they're probably not going to appear that much, because, their presence might end up doing more harm than good to the family. So they're sitting it out. So it's going to be Colin and Penelope, who I don't think they're bad. They come with the package of the Featheringtons, which I really don't care for them anymore. So let's see how it goes. I am not very optimistic, and I do not know how they will play this out, but I hope they do bring back the focus to the Bridgerton, and maybe give the rightful leads a chance to tell their own story without being intruded upon by 10,000 different characters. And I hope you guys had a good time watching the latest Bridgerton season, and I would love to hear your thoughts about this. You can reach out to me on my socials, Instagram or Twitter. It's talk_about_drama. Talk About Drama is available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, Amazon Music Podcast, and Audible. You can leave me a comment on Spotify and YouTube as well. And thank you so much for listening to me ramble about the Bridgertons, or the lack of thereof. And hopefully the next season is the one that we're looking for. Fingers crossed it's going to be better. And I'm going to go and read the novel and just see how bad or how good this adaptation was. And I will see you guys next time. Until then, I hope you guys are having a good week. Ciao.